Video 3. We are now about halfway through the class, believe it or not. Pre-session is so intense, and you guys are doing a great job. Hang in there. We're almost there. We're halfway through. So I'm going to start off today talking about representation. I know that I have talked about representation quite a bit in some of the discussion groups, or the groups have discussed them, but not in all of them. Do look at my post on the note on representation again if you read that rather quickly, because I think that really gets at the type of differences between the representation and the object that I want you to think about in this paper. So representation, what is it? It's how someone presents or represents or sees someone or something else. See, this batik behind me is a representation of a woman by an artist. If I were doing my project, I could examine this as my representation of a woman, the water jug on her head, and discuss that art form, what it says about that woman. I might look at, do some research on the artist and see, what factors in the artist's life might have contributed to this representation. You, of course, don't have to pick a visual representation. You can use a text that we've read in class. You can use a film. You can use a text that you choose, but I want it to be a representation of a woman. It can be a representation that a woman does of herself. So if you're looking at Anne Frank's diary, there we see a young girl who is representing herself to an audience, which is an interesting thing, really, considering it's a diary. But this is a diary that Anne Frank seems to always believe will be read by someone, and of course it has been, and it's probably one of the most widely published diaries ever. So in your discussion of the representation, I don't want you to focus just on the artist or the author or the individual who created the representation, but on the relationship between that creator and the subject, the woman in the representation. And given that focus, I really don't care how you do it, but I think it's important to consider audience, probably. Generally, when we make art or writing, we do it with a certain audience in mind, and sometimes it ends up being consumed and appreciated by other audiences that weren't intended, so that might be something else to consider. But you really have a lot of freedom in this project, and you're going to be turning in a description of what you think the project is going to be, give me an idea of what you've done so far, and certainly include any sources that you've looked at or are thinking you're going to look at, because that will give me a better idea of what you're doing. And if I see anything that seems like it's not going to work, I'll let you know right away about that. But mostly, I'm just making you turn in your description of the project so that it's not the day before it's due and you're sitting there thinking, what am I going to turn in? So this is good for you, and it's good for me to see where you're going. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to address in this video is the trajectory of the course. We started off with kind of these ideas, really old ideas about gender and stereotypes of gender that have been internalized and become part of our culture. And now we're in the part of the class that I really love, and the most exciting and probably optimistic part of the class, where we're looking at work by these amazing women, starting with Mary Wollstonecraft and her original argument about why we need education for women. Then we've got Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Sojourner Truth, who are doing very logical and persuasive writing and speeches with the intention of persuading an audience of the need for the advancement of women's rights. We go on to the Diary of Anne Frank, and here, as I've already said, is again another amazing young girl with such, she's both a child, and yet she has these moments of wonderful clarity and maturity that are surprising and wonderful, and given her story, these words have even more power. We move on to Louisa May Alcott, a fascinating writer who's best known for her her novel for girls, Little Women, but she also secretly wrote these sensational stories that people didn't even know she wrote until after she was dead. In fact, we only discovered some of them in this century. So, Alcott, we're looking at her diaries, not her children's stories. Emily Dickinson, the 19th century American women writer. She's really the only one we have that has the prestige and esteem of the British writers of the same period. And go on to female artists, female authors and novelists. We'll be reading Virginia Woolf, and then moving into 20th century female poets. So this is a really exciting, empowering part of the class. And then in the last few class periods, we're moving from these representations of women that are really complex and intuitive and interesting to some that I think are kind of disheartening. And I think it's important to realize that even though we've had all this really good development in the way we think about women and gender, there are still, and our discussions have focused on this, so many really disempowering ideas of women that are being portrayed and perpetuated. So we're going to look at music videos and the movie Dreamworlds 3 and the way women are represented in music videos. And I think this is a very disturbing video. We'll go on to advertising. And I purposely picked some advertisements that have some subtlety, but some of them are quite obvious, but are really give us a lot to critique. I know that there are better and more interesting ads out there, but I think it's important that we look at the ones we're looking at. And of course, we can supplement our discussion by looking at other advertising projects that may not contribute to the problem in the way that these ads do. And then we'll look at TV and see what we think about that. I mean, Grey's Anatomy does some things that I think are very progressive and interesting, and at the same time it's doing, maybe it's just Patrick Dempsey, but it's doing some of the same things that Enchanted does and reinforcing ideas that are not really helping anyone. So that's where we're going, and just keep up the good work.